Hello, welcome to the Neighborhood Housing and Development Subcommittee meeting. I am Kate Gallego, joined by Laura Pastor and Danny Valenzuela. We believe Councilman DeCiccio is joining us, but we will be in suspense for a moment. And so we will call the meeting to order and begin with a call to the public. Pamela Bridge.
Good morning. I'm Pamela Bridge, and with me today are Zachary Dorn and Stanley Silas from Community Legal Services. As you are aware, on March 23rd, this coming Monday, individuals for the first time will be able to apply online for Section 8 vouchers. This is the first time that the wait list is going to open in 11 years. The wait list is so important because there's only so many vouchers that the City of Phoenix has. And what they do is then pick eligible applicants from the wait list to be able to have Section 8 vouchers, which is so key to ending homelessness, to providing affordable and safe housing to our low-income community. Now, we met with the Department of Housing yesterday, and Section 8 is only going to allow 10,000 people on that wait list. Now, that sounds like a big number, I bet. However, we were informed yesterday they think the need is so great for these vouchers that it is going to fill in the first 24 to 48 hours. That's a huge need in our community. That means that those who take longer to fill out the applications will get a higher number. Those who can't complete it in 24 to 48 hours are not going to be able to be on the wait list and will have no chance of receiving Section 8 vouchers. So that first 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours are critical to the low-income families of City of Phoenix. And it has to be done right. It has to comply with the law. So yesterday we met with the Department of Housing about several of our issues with the current application system and the wait list and some barriers that we see to our vulnerable populations. But the biggest and the most emergent reason why I'm here today is that currently the application is online and is only in English. Applicants have to do that application in English. They've developed a couple of systems that you can go to third parties for assistance, or you can download things and try to translate it yourself and then figure out how to answer in English. But these are barriers to our Spanish-speaking community. And Community Legal Services strongly believes this violates Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. We believe that these are barriers that don't have to be here. Other cities our size with our community and our community are able to have Spanish language applications online through Google, through other systems. We know that Phoenix can do it. We know Phoenix can comply with the law, and we are asking for that. Today, we've sent several emails, and today we heard that they are working with their vendor and will know very soon whether this is possible. We were told that they will stall the deadline if it can't be done. And we believe that is the right thing to do, because and we understand that this is a challenge, for the City of Phoenix. Even as of yesterday, several of the documents were not translated into Spanish yet. The document telling you where to go if you need language assistance is in English. This cannot be done at the last minute. We need to make sure, we owe it to those families to make sure that it is done right, it complies with the law. It's a huge challenge for the City of Phoenix to take 10,000 applications in one day, and I admire your attempts. I think that's incredible. But it also, for those families who the wait list hasn't opened in 11 years, those families have 24 to 48 hours to do a life-changing event. This is going to prevent them from homelessness. This is going to change the lives of their children. So we need to make sure that we have the oversight, that we're being careful, that we comply with the law, and that we have that online intake done in Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you for that update, and staff's available for more details if anyone else is interested in their work on that issue. That is all of our cards for public comment, so we will move to meetings. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you. We have a consent agenda with several housing items, the homelessness update, and a QVL for neighborhood services. Would anyone like to make a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent items 3 through 7.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Now we will move to Planning and Development and welcome our Planning Director, Alan Stevenson, up. Discuss impact fees.
Good morning, Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee. I have with me Mary Ann Fotinos and Adam Miller, who oversee the infrastructure financing program for the city of Phoenix. This proposed is a minor amendment to our infrastructure financing plan for Chapter 29 related to development impact fees. As you'll recall, back in the end of 2014, the City Council adopted our current impact fee program that came into effective date in April of 2015. Impact fees charge fees for services that are provided in new growth areas of the city, so predominantly the northern and southern areas. The impact fee categories are fire protection, police, parks, library, water resource acquisition, water, wastewater, storm drains, and major arterials. This update was done in compliance with major changes in state statute that were approved by the Arizona legislature a few years before that. And so those state law changes became effective in January 2012. We did a minor update then, and 2015 was the big one that I just referenced. And as part of implementing that big update, there were a couple of issues that staff realized that we need to make some modifications to. Those fit the criteria for a minor amendment, and with that, I'll have Adam Miller kind of walk us through those ones.
Thank you, Alan. Good morning. I just have a couple of slides to review some of the details of the changes. Just to repeat, just a couple slides to review the details of the proposed changes. But before I get into those, I just wanted to mention that City Code and state statute authorize a minor amendment process to adopt changes to the impact fee program that meet certain criteria. The overriding determination there as to whether a minor amendment procedure is allowed is whether or not there are fee increases. In this case, the changes that we're going to be discussing pertaining to the fire protection fee and the major arterials fee, we do have some proposed fee reductions. There are no increases, and the changes do meet the criteria for this minor amendment procedure. But I just want to point that out, that the term minor in this context is a technical term, not an interpretation of staff. When the state law was amended in 2012, a higher bar was established for determining project eligibility for funding with impact fee revenue. One of the requirements from that amendment was to ensure that all projects are identified on what's referred to as an infrastructure improvements plan. As we have implemented this project, the program since 2012 and conducted the update in 2015, we recognized that one of our projects was not listed on the improvements plan in the way that it needed to be in order to be eligible. So the first proposed amendment related to the fire protection is to add a fire station to the improvements plan so that it's clearly identified as an eligible facility. This does not on its own have an impact to the fee. The good news is the need for the fire station was included. It's just the fire station facility itself was not specifically identified on the plan. So there is no change by adding this facility to the infrastructure improvements plan. As part of our discussions on how to go forward with ensuring that this project would be eligible for impact fee funding, we recognized the reason that it hadn't been included on the plan was actually because the city had already acquired the site for the fire station, so it was identified as an existing station. In further review, we recognized that actually the city has 3 sites that had already been acquired that weren't accounted for in the infrastructure financing plan. One site in the northwest, one in the southwest, and one in the Ahwatukee fee area. So by going through this minor amendment process, we're able to adjust the fee to account for that land that has already been acquired, take that out of the program, and it results in a reduction to the fire protection fee consistent with that acreage that's no longer needed to be acquired. The variation in the fee reductions is related to the different land values across the city, as well as a difference in sizes of the sites that have already been acquired. So you see the $6 reduction in the Southwest is relatively less than the other reductions. This is mostly because the site that we've acquired in the Southwest is quite a bit smaller than the typical site that we would procure for a fire station. Any questions on fire? Okay, moving forward with the major arterials change. One of the basic tenets of impact fees that has been promulgated by the courts over the years is that we can only charge fees that are proportionate to the demand or the impact of a development. When we went through the 2015 update, we went through a process of consolidating multiple types of land uses and assigning a specific demand unit for those land uses. One of the unintended consequences that we've encountered as a result of this is, for example, with lodging, lodging became consolidated with general retail and commercial. The demand units, the equivalent demand units for commercial and retail in terms of traffic generation are much higher than the demand units for a lodging development. So what we're proposing is to reestablish lodging as its own land use, assign a demand unit that is more consistent with the traffic generation we'd expect from a lodging development, and doing the same with mini warehouse, which was consolidated into our industrial warehousing category. So the result would be a reduction in the demand units for lodging by about 70%, and a reduction in the demand units for mini warehouse by just over 50%. And I have just a couple examples of how that change in the demand units would affect a sample project. On the left, you can see a hotel example, a 100,000 square foot hotel with 150 rooms. Under the current fee, that project would pay about $327,000 in major arterials fees. With the adjustment that is supported by proportionate shared demand and the traffic generation that's justified through the Institute of Traffic Engineers studies, their fee would come down to about $147,000 for major arterials specifically. And in mini warehouse, a reduction of about 50% to the fee. And if there aren't any questions, staff is requesting subcommittee to recommend approval of the minor amendment to the infrastructure financing plan, as well as the corresponding amendments to Chapter 29, the Development Impact Fees chapter. The infrastructure financing plan would come to City Council through resolution. The changes to the City Code would be through ordinance.
Great. You all will be stunned to know that no one from the hotel industry or mini storage came to council to oppose lower fees. So we have no cards.
Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee, I'd also add that staff has met with the Central Arizona Home Builders Association, the Arizona Multi-Housing Association, as well as Valley Partnership on this, and they didn't have any issues with it as well.
Wonderful. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? We have a motion.
I move approval for item 8.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Excellent. And today's theme is planning and development, so we've had a lot of those themes lately.
We have, Vice Mayor. I'd like to welcome up with me here Ms. Sandy Hoffman and Ms. Erin Andres. Erin oversees our sign section for the city, and you, of course, know Sandy as the Deputy Director over the Planning Division. And so this proposed text amendment deals specifically with a change in off-premise sign advertising within an area in District 1 that is known as Metro Center. And it allows for some increased signage. They can have one additional billboard in their portion of I-17 frontage, and allows for some different sign criteria along that freeway frontage. And with that, I'll have Ms. Hoffman kind of walk us through the details.
Good morning. The North Mountain Redevelopment Area was established in 2014 to assist in revitalization of the surrounding area, including Metro Center. The North Mountain Village Core is located at Metro Center, and the site is in the process of rezoning to a planned unit development. The PUD will guide the transition to a mixed-use development in this area. Thank you. The purpose and scope of the text amendment will accomplish several things, including increase revitalization efforts, allow a dynamic mix of signage for the redevelopment area, reduce spacing between off-premises signs, allow a mix of on and off-premises copy, and require a use permit to allow sign heights above 48 feet. And again, they must have an obstruction to warrant having that use permit an additional height. Staff requests the Neighborhood Housing and Development Subcommittee recommend City Council approval of zoning ordinance text amendment ZTA 9-15 as approved by the Planning Commission.
Do not have any cards on this item. Any questions for my colleagues?
I move, motion, yeah. Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. We're beginning to get a trend. Vacant land uses. This is something we hear about a lot from the community, and thank you to the many people who have been involved in getting us to where we are today.
Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee, I'd like to welcome up Craig Mavis, who was the principal author of this text amendment. As many of you know, within the downtown code area for the last couple of years, we have allowed interim vacant lot activation to take place as a test pilot to see how it would really do in a walkable environment where you're trying to create a little activity. We've got lots of vacant land in the city, but where it's of primary importance where you have areas where we're trying to promote walking to have a little bit more interest within those areas. So one of the most prominent ones is at the northwest or northeast corner of 2nd Avenue and Roosevelt. There's this blue art installation that's up there in a little grassy area and some trees. That was all brought forward by the community. In response, staff developed that text amendment to allow it within downtown. And so when we had our infill advisory group about a year and a half or so ago, one of the things that they asked us to do was look at expanding that to areas along the light rail line. We're also promoting walking as well. And so I'll also introduce Ms. Hoffman to walk us through the details on that one.
Sorry, and actually, I'm going to give Craig Mavis the opportunity since he was the author of this, so I'll let him go through that.
Just keeps going down. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the City Council. I'm here to give a brief overview of this text amendment. As Alan had mentioned, that there is a significant amount of community input into this process. We heard this through the Reinvent Phoenix as well as the general plan update as a need to want interim uses along our light rail line to show activity in the very important areas of our town. So as Alan had mentioned, you have the two good examples here on the slide. The big thing here is just making sure that whatever uses go into these particular locations have defined standards so they're being sensitive to the immediately adjacent areas and communities. Where this will apply is in two areas in particular. You have any arterial property off an arterial immediately adjacent to a light rail. So that is denoted on this particular map, but also the area that falls within the general plan adopted infill development district. The two differences between the two locations is an administrative temporary use permit for those arterial or properties off of an arterial along a light rail. The use permit would temporary use permit for properties anywhere within that blue boundary. So it's a public hearing process for the use permit and then an administrative temporary use permit along the light rail line itself. Some small details from the actual text itself is that the defined setbacks and lot coverages and making sure it's sensitive to the adjacent single-family uses and historic preservation districts. We also want to make sure that any type of retail sales is occurring within a building so it's not out in the open, and also to limit any type of accessory parking at particular use itself. So we don't want to see a whole lot of parking lots. We just want to make sure that the standards are very sensitive to the immediate areas. 6 villages are impacted by this particular text amendment. Those have a light rail or the infill development district within them. 3 of which, all 6 approved, 3 of which had some slight modifications. The Central City Village recommended removing the time limit. The Encanto Village recommended allowing view fencing up to 6 feet in height. And finally, South Mountain wanted it to be allowed throughout the city. At this point in time, staff is moving forward with the recommendation as outlined within and approved by our Planning Commission, which was approved by an 8-0 vote. And as I mentioned, the recommendation is that the subcommittee recommend approval per the Planning Commission recommendation. if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Thank you.
I have some.
Councilwoman Pastor.
Can you go to, let's see, it's probably number 4, right? The parking. Limit, what does that mean?
Currently, as outlined in these proposed text amendment, it identifies that it's as accessory use only. So we want to make sure that any type of an accessory parking that is going on there is not going to be exceeding a certain number. And so right now, as it's worded, is that it's not exceeding 3 spaces per 10,000 square feet of area. So we don't want to see a temporary lot for parking. We'd rather see some sort of a public art or a display.
So let me give you an example. I'm assuming we're Highland and Central. There's construction happening there. There's a back lot that's being used right now for customers to use temporarily until the construction is done. Is that what we're talking about?
So,
I just need clarity.
Vice Mayor, Councilwoman Pastor, that is not what we're talking about here. So separate provisions of the ordinance allow someone to apply for a temporary use to create a parking lot. For example, you're aware of the one on Highland that was where the apartments are built now. So that was there for a long time. That was a temporary use under different provisions of the ordinance. This is only allowing, kind of accessory uses like a little mini park, artwork, those types of activation things. It does not allow for parking as a primary use. The language that is accessory with an O, not accessory with an A up here, but that is only meant to allow for, if you have a retail sales, you could have parking for that sales office, whatever you're selling there on that temporary basis. You can't have parking for off-site uses as part of this proposal.
Okay, so that makes sense to me now. Thank you.
And can you give us an example of retail sales that might occur outdoors? I'm thinking arts, but I'm sure.
Vice Mayor, members of subcommittee, I think art would probably be one of the principal ones because there are farmers markets that we'll talk about that do things separately than this, but I think it would probably be more art because you can't do mobile vending as part of this either. So you couldn't have a food truck that would be on those parcels doing that as well. So it would be limited to more of that, the art, those kinds of things that would take place.
And we'd really expect to see that more during events or times of greater use than.
Correct. The both processes, the administrative temporary use permit and the use permit, require review by staff. One does, the use permit trigger a public hearing as well, so the public can have input, but the staff would have stipulations regarding hours of operations and those kinds of things. It's really supposed to be something that's adding to the community to create some vibrancy on otherwise vacant lots, not something that's causing a nuisance to the public. And that's why both of those require use permits that staff can work with them to say, look, you're not abiding by what the public expectations are with this. If we need to go try and push them, we can ultimately threaten to revoke their use permit if they don't comply and aren't a good neighbor.
Mm-hmm. And so the Central City Village had wanted to remove time limits, but the reason we have time limits is if there is issues with the neighborhood, it gives us a tool to address that.
Correct, Vice Mayor.
Because we do very much appreciate our village planning commissioners and their advice to us. But
yes, and because this text amendment sits in a part of the ordinance that is all about temporary uses, it would seem somewhat odd to talk about temporary uses with no time limit associated with what's temporary.
that is, to me, a convincing argument, Councilwoman.
I'm just trying to visualize this and giving concrete examples. So would Central and Indian School, that was an empty lot. We have now are using it. I'm going back to the HP, or not the HP, the village, where they were talking about fencing. So there's fencing around this lot. We're talking about activating these type of pieces of lots for temporary uses, or just I'm thinking also a temporary pop-up vending art piece, or kind of a festival drawing to that lot. So am I on the right track?
Vice Mayor, Councilman Pastor, yes, you're on the right track. It's adding that a little bit of once in a while, kind of retail activity to what is otherwise, principally just a more visual aesthetic improvement to that lot. It's not meant to be you open up a regular store that's open,
Right.
Monday through Friday, and you don't have to do all the improvements to open up a regular store.
So it's kind of like the Ludwig's Rose Garden right now,
Yeah,
kind of.
kind of, yeah.
I'm just trying to give examples for the viewer to mark their place, to say, oh yeah, okay, I get it. So, thank you.
Could we go to slide 5, which is the Village Planning Commission recommendations? And will you walk us through the other two in Canto and South Mountain? And
Go ahead, Greg.
So in Canto, sorry?
So the other two, in Canto Village Planning Committee recommended that the view fencing be allowed up to 6 feet in height on a temporary, as a temporary use is occurring. The South Mountain then felt that this was a very important text amendment and weren't comfortable with just limiting only to the infill, but also making it citywide.
And so on the Encanto recommendation, so I was also picturing Indian School and Central, and I would describe that as view fencing?
Correct.
So
Absolutely.
that would not be allowed? What does the ordinance say about view fencing? And
So right now, this text amendment would not permit that view fencing to go up. If an individual wanted to have that, there would be a separate process to have a fence or wall over 40 inches in height in a required front yard setback or building setback. So it would require a variance to get that additional height.
And can you speak to why we do that?
Sure, Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee. In general, the city doesn't allow overheight fences in the front yard, so we limit them to 40 inches to promote some openness and viewing, so we don't have a walled-in community. And so we require, in the case of if it's a front yard, you would have to get a variance in order to exceed that height to have the additional. And as part of that, they typically would propose view fencing because it would be very unique for the hearing officer to approve an 8-foot block wall or 6-foot block wall, along in the front yard, because it doesn't promote that openness.
And the Encanto Village was not persuaded by that?
Apparently not.
Okay. And then on South Mountain, we are thinking about expanding this in the future, but that wasn't how we noticed it. Would that be?
Yeah, Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee, I would say that right now, we should expand it to what staff is currently proposing, see how it works a little bit more. We can always go back and expand it more in the future, similar to what we did with the downtown area. It's really, I think, about promoting some interest on properties where we see a high number of people walking, and we're focused more on that within the downtown along the light rail line, as opposed to the potential issues that may come up with a citywide application where you have neighbors that are concerned about somebody doing something on a vacant lot who doesn't live in the neighborhood, and what their ideas of activation may be in the middle of the neighborhood probably could cause potentially more negative impacts than the positive that would come from activating that lot. And so we want to see a little bit more how this will work before we would entertain really going citywide with it.
And some of the lots that I think the South Mountain Village is particularly concerned about are actually city-owned lots, so we could go forward with that today.
Vice Mayor, that is correct. The city can go forward and do things on their lot temporarily if they'd like.
Ready for a motion?
Item 9. I move the recommendations for item, I want to say 10.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Zoning to ordinance regarding design review committee. And this is one where we may be a little bit ahead of ourselves on this one.
Yes, Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee, this is a request to modify the composition of the Design Review Committee to accommodate changes that are underway with the Walkable Urban Code. Currently, the Section 306 and Section 507 of the zoning ordinance deal with our design review process and principally applies within the downtown area because that's where we have our foam-based code. As you know, the city's been involved in the Reinvent Phoenix process and expanding our walkable urban code, and so that's what's driving the look to change that makeup of the Design Review Committee. And with that, I'll have Sandy walk us through this.
All right. Good morning again. Background. As part of the Reinvent Phoenix project, 5 new transit-oriented districts were formed that are showing up on the map and the graphic. As part of this effort, the Walkable Urban Code was created. So what this will do in the text amendment is modify Section 309 so that it will empower the Design Review Committee to hear appeals of the Walkable Urban Code and the design alternatives and standards for the 5 transit-oriented districts. So the colorful map that you see up on the screen identifies the 4 village planning areas that include the transit-oriented districts and the downtown code area. Those include the Central City, Alhambra, Encanto, and Camelback East villages. They each have a portion of the transit-oriented districts within their boundaries. And right now, only Central City Village has representatives on the Design Review Committee. So it's showing you that. Design Review Committee, the table right now shows the text amendment will change 2 residents and 1 Central City Village Committee member to allow for 1 representative from each of the other villages that are within the area, including Alhambra, Encanto, and Camelback East. There's no total change in the number of members. So the modification, the text amendment will also change the time frame from 20 days to 30 days to schedule the Design Review Committee hearing and change the public notice from 10 days to 15 days after filing the application. This allows time for staff to actually process that and to meet those deadlines. It's also matching what we also have for other hearings within the zoning ordinance. So the village planning committees, all 4 of the village planning committees and the planning commission recommended approval of the text amendment, with only the Alhambra Village Committee approving with the recommendation to modify the membership to include 2 members from their village. Staff requests Neighborhood Housing and Development Subcommittee recommend approval of zoning ordinance text amendment ZTA 4-15 as approved by the planning commission. With that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And this is one where we actually haven't done the zoning yet for the Walkable Urban Code.
Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee, that's correct. I'm going back a couple of slides to talk about. You'll recall that we were before the subcommittee in June of last year, where you approved the transit district plans, May and June, but for Eastlake, Garfield, Gateway, and then Midtown, Uptown, and Solano. Those were approved by the subcommittee in May, June, and then ultimately full council in June and July. At the full council hearing, staff was directed to work with the Eastlake community on changing the zoning map to effectuate the walkable urban code zoning. And since that time, staff has been working with the Eastlake folks, and that process is coming forward. Ultimately, if it stays on the current track, it will be approved by the full council in July at your final meeting before the break. And so that is the second part of the whole process for the walkable urban code, is to, 1, put it in the ordinance, which you guys did back in last year. This next part is the actual mapping exercise, and that's the part that we've been working with Eastlake for most of a year now to try and get done there with all the property owners, the business owners, the residents, and so it is a lengthy process to do that. So we would anticipate going to the Gateway Transit District area next, and then going Midtown, Uptown, Solano, as we continue to work forward on this. But we don't have the staff to do this en masse, because it is changing everyone's zoning. Staff, in effect, acts like an applicant in this case. We send out all the legally required notices. We make sure the area gets posted so that everyone knows about the zoning change. So it's quite involved. And so it's although the walkable urban code is in the zoning ordinance, it's not effective yet in any place within the city, and it won't be, the first area would be Eastlake in July, as I said.
So it would be my preference to continue this until we've actually done the zoning, so that they have something to review on the Design Review Committee.
Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee, if that's the desires of the subcommittee, staff is okay with that, because we do have a lot more work to effectively get there.
Would my colleagues be comfortable continuing this?
I would be comfortable and make the motion for it if we're ready for that. Are we, so should we put a date on it?
Should we wait until it's done? Is that an acceptable motion?
Perhaps if you I just want to make a motion to withdraw the item now and bring it back for consideration in the future when we get further along. Then staff can look at it, we'll come back and talk to you as we get further along to see where we're at with the mapping. Is that?
So I have a, Madam Chair, I have a question about this because as we went through reInvent, and I was at the tail end of it, didn't the same process happen? I mean, it started in Eastlake Park, and then it moved, the charrettes started to move up to the different transit-oriented areas. And then I feel like we're still in the process. Now we're just doing it, we're doing the same process, but we're doing it with the WU code. Kinda. Yes?
Vice Mayor, Councilwoman Pastor, I would say yes, with the slight twist on it that when you actually change someone's zoning, the property owners, you tend to get more of a response from those people than you otherwise would have. So we did a lot of outreach, tried to get people interested in the planning process. But, lots of people don't respond until you get something in the mail saying the city is going to do something on your property or a neighboring property. And then people start to, starts a second level of awareness, if you will, about what's happening. And so that's really what's happening at this time with these areas, because we didn't do individual property owner notice. It was bigger neighborhood associations, getting key stakeholders involved as the early process. And now it's working with all those property owners. And so that's why it does take a little more time to do this.
So it's now the implementation of the.
Correct.
Pretty
yeah.
much the implementation of the ordinance and getting everybody to understand the new ordinance.
That's correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Just a thought, if I could, too, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just a couple things. One, I mean, this is just basically, before you even look at the zoning part of it, this is basically an overall structure that allows you to fit the zoning into it. I mean, I don't mind moving it forward today or even delaying it. It's whatever anybody wants to do up here, but there are some things in here, correct me if I'm wrong, that I think that people kind of want to see, like moving the notifications from 10 days to 15 days. That gives the applicants and the public more time to review it. That's been some of the complaints. Like I said, if you guys want to continue it, that's fine, but I think that there's some things in the overall structure in this this document here, that are really in favor toward the public, that are things that you want to see. There's one in here that deals with economic development, allows that to, it encourages it to go forward, but it brings everything under compliance for North Mountain Village. I'm open to anything that anyone wants to do, but...
What does it do for North Mountain Village?
Well, it allows for the building height in there. It talks about spacing with signs. This is part of Zelda's district, with...
We passed that unanimously.
Okay, if you want to hold it...
We just passed on that.
I
We
know,
voted
but
on that
just-
already.
I know, but I'm talking about this here. This is part of
That was the last agenda item?
Yeah, we're on 11, too. It's just talking about the text amendment that we're dealing with here.
Okay.
Which page?
Vice Mayor, Councilman DeCiccio, I think what Councilman DeCiccio is referencing is the summary sheet. And so this doesn't have any impact in District 1.
Oh, it doesn't have
The prior
anything in it.
item was the impact in District 1. This one is really District 4, 5, and 8.
Okay.
Principally. And so if the subcommittee desired, the staff could move forward with the modified length of time and for the 10 to 15 days and the 30 days at this time, and then come back on the makeup side, since there's already a text amendment that's moving forward, if that's what the subcommittee desires.
I think that makes sense.
So just move that part of this, basically dealing with the design review committee.
Yes.
Okay, the motion to approve then.
So let me just
How do you want to
clarify.
do it? It's up to you.
Maybe I could clarify for the record. I think what we would want some direction to move forward on is to modify the length for an applicant to send notice from 10 days to 15 days after filing the application, and change the time frame to hold the hearing from 20 days to 30 calendar days. So those are ordinance requirements that will make it easier to inform the public about those events.
Right. And I think we already had a motion on the table, so.
Yeah, Well, the motion on the table was to postpone, correct?
So we could do it, that could be, I think, a friendly amendment to the motion, and so we would still postpone the change in composition.
Yeah, I think probably what would be maybe easiest, say motion to deny as filed, approve only the notification of 10 to 15 days and the 20 days to 30 days. And then that's what goes forward as your recommendation to approve that change. The rest wouldn't be there, and then per your direction, we would then look at modifying and coming back sometime as we get the zoning changed throughout the transit areas.
Great.
May I ask?
Amendment.
I'll second.
And then if I could ask,
Great.
is it okay? Is there anything else in there? I didn't see anything else that would be a part of that, but that would, basically deal with the transparency part, notification part, anything else like that? I think that was pretty much it.
No, I think those are the only items in there that we were seeking to change other than that composition. And so,
And the composition basically is to allow more people to have the opportunity that are impacted by this to be a part of the process. Is there a reason why we don't want to do that from the council members? I don't know why we wouldn't want to allow more involvement from other people that are impacted by this.
I think we're ahead of ourselves, that we got to do the zoning for them to review before we look at changing the committee.
But it involves other parts of it too. I mean, the reason that the composition was done is so that you have an input from other parts of the city, so that they're able to bring in their viewpoints from those parts of the cities in the composition part. I'm just wondering what the logic is behind delaying that part.
So, Vice Mayor, Councilman DeCiccio, I think the issue that the Vice Mayor has raised is that it doesn't yet apply in the other parts of the district. So, for example, Gateway, the zoning doesn't apply there. So having people make recommendations on something when the zoning doesn't apply is probably a little too premature at this point. And that's where, because it's taken staff so long to get through East Lake, and I imagine some similar timeframes as we move north into more heavily populated parts of the city, we'll have some challenges because we are seeing really a second wave of interest in the walkable urban code as we've done the outreach pursuant to state statute. And so that's where we'll spend some more time to work out. So it may be a while before we get to actually having the walkable urban code mapped and therefore effective on those parcels within the different village areas.
So once it hits the village areas, then it's time to change the composition, because then it has an impact on them.
Correct.
Okay, I'm good.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Moving on to farmers markets.
Mayor, members of Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee, this is a change to our existing farmers market zoning regulations. Those have been in place for about 3 or 4 years now, and so currently it requires a use permit, which has notification requirements, and then staff, as part of that hearing process, will have some on-site operational conditions like hours of operation. All those kinds of things would go with that. As well as any improvements. And staff has been, working with some stakeholder groups with Ms. Teresa Hillner and Sandy Hoffman as the leads in this area. So I'll ask them to walk us through the details here.
So staff's recommendation is to allow an ATUP, an administrative temporary use permit, for commercial and industrial zoning districts. So there's no there's no notice with an ATUP, and the review was streamlined, and we were recommending that no food trucks be included in the ATUP process. Right now, use permits are required for farmers markets within a residential district and those that dispense food from vehicles. The use permit process allows for neighborhood and property owner notice and the ability to mitigate the impacts from that. The Planning Commission recommendation was to allow vehicles exclusively selling fresh produce in the commercial and industrial zoning districts, just within the ATUP provision being required. The village results, we had 9 village planning committees that approved per the staff recommendation. Not 4, but 3, only 3 approved with modifications, and 3 did not have a quorum. The identified modifications with the 3 villages that proposed those included rewriting section 622D60C to be less awkward. 2, to further define vehicles that dispense food and beverage, and that was done by Desert View. And the 3rd recommended change was to allow vehicles exclusively selling fresh produce, such as the example would be Fresh Express, to be subject to an ATUP. Staff have concerns regarding the ability to legally enforce zoning provisions that are solely based upon a product type compared to general use like retail sales. Staff requests that the Neighborhood Housing and Development Subcommittee recommend approval of zoning ordinance text amendment ZTA 6-15 per staff recommendation or per Planning Commission recommendation as stated in the City Council report. With that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Exciting that we're going to be able to have more locally grown, healthy food in more of our communities. So thank you to staff for their hard work, and thank you to the committee for your hard work. We do have a card from CJ Hager with Vitalist. I'm still learning to say that. New name. Thank you for your support. It's available to speak if requested. In favor, did you want to speak? Wonderful. Any questions from my colleagues? All right, with that, okay.
Can you go back to the language, let's see, 7, no. Okay. So we're expanding,
So this is the existing regulations, Councilman Bastaro. So the proposed amendment kind of creates 2 categories. One would be an administrative temporary use permit, which is the streamlined review, does not allow for anything for food trucks in commercial and industrial districts. The other part is to say if you want to do the food trucks as part of your farmer's market, within that you need a use permit. So that is a public hearing, lets the neighbors weigh in because mobile food vending is more intensive than just your standard farmer's market where you put out your produce on a table and have those kind of sales. And so it's one that we typically have a lot more community concern about mobile vending. So that's why staff believes it's appropriate to have the use permit hearing if you're going to have that additional allowance. And the staff concerns with the Planning Commission recommendation is it kind of blurs the line and says you can sell, if you use fresh produce out of a mobile vending truck, that's permitted to be done under the ATUP standard, which doesn't require any public hearing. And staff has concerns about how we can enforce those type of food products being sold because the impacts to surrounding properties are pretty much the same. If you pull up in a mobile truck and are selling lettuce and carrots, and that's what somebody's walking away with versus somebody walking away with a hot dog and a Coke on the surrounding properties is pretty much the same. And so if we went with the Planning Commission recommendation, we believe it ultimately would be very difficult for us to enforce whether or not something's healthy, and then ultimately what would lead to an erosion of our ability to regulate the mobile vending that causes a lot of neighborhood angst.
okay. So there's a lot of farmers markets within District 4 and throughout the city. I'm thinking of North Baptist Church on the weekends, and they do have food trucks. So now what will this new regulation do?
So there are, that type of farmer's market happens because it's accessory to a church. And so churches can do nonprofit activities like bingo and other types of activities. And so that's what that one is permitted to be under. It also doesn't impact farmers markets that are at city locations. So Roadrunner Park up in Northeast Phoenix has a farmer's market. This doesn't change any of that either. And there are some existing ones that this doesn't change either. So those are in place today. They're governed by the old rules. And in that case, they got use permits. This makes it easier to do the healthier, kind of lower impact sales of the fresh produce by making it a staff review versus a public hearing, but it protects the public from the more impactful mobile vending side of things.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Ready for a motion?
I move item 12 for approval.
Second.
All in favor, please
Vice
say
Mayor,
aye.
members of the subcommittee, could I just, per the staff recommendation?
For the staff recommendation.
It's the only one I will second.
All in favor, please say aye. Passes unanimously. That is our final presentation for today. We have a lot to look forward in June, including perhaps moving forward on some TOD and building code amendments. Any agenda items that my colleagues would like to add to our June agenda?
I would, Vice Mayor would like to add the
Update on Section 8.
update in Section 8.
Wonderful. Yep, that is one that's important to many folks. And language access has always been a priority of this committee.
Yeah, I think they hear it. They understand.
Fabulous. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.